They told you emotions make you human, that to feel is to live. But what if that was the very lie that made you weak? What if the world wasn't shaped by those who felt deeply, but by those who felt nothing at all? This isn't about becoming numb. It's about becoming untouchable. The man who cannot be moved, cannot be broken, and in a world built on manipulation, that man becomes king. Control begins where emotion ends. The average mind reacts. It flinches, it trembles, it attaches. It builds its identity on praise and crumbles under insult. It fears rejection, craves validation, and walks on a leash held by those who know how to pull its strings. But the Machiavellian mind operates differently. It detaches. It observes. It watches the emotional chaos around it, not as a participant, but as a puppeteer. And in that detachment, it gains one thing the emotional can never own: absolute power. You were trained to care, not out of virtue, but out of strategy. From childhood, you were fed the idea that kindness is the path to acceptance, that vulnerability is strength, and that openness is a sign of trust. But beneath that narrative lies the truth no one dared to teach you. When you remove emotion from your responses, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is the most dangerous weapon in human interaction, because people can't manipulate what they can't read. The greatest power doesn't come from being loved. It comes from being unreadable. A man who feels too much is easy to target. He reacts, he confesses, he craves closure. But a man who feels nothing, or at least appears to, becomes a mirror. Others project their fears, their needs, their insecurities onto him. He becomes a ghost in plain sight. That's when control begins. That's when the chessboard shifts. When someone insults you and you show no response, not anger, not pain, not even amusement, you steal their weapon from their hand. The insult has no power. When someone begs for a reaction and you remain still, their energy turns inward. They implode under the weight of their own expectations. This is not coldness for cruelty's sake. It is strategy. It is emotional warfare, perfected. There's a difference between suppression and transcendence. Suppression is emotional denial, a ticking bomb. Transcendence is awareness without reaction, the sword of a master. Most people never reach it. They're too consumed with the highs and lows. They need to feel something to remind themselves they exist. But that craving is the leash. The moment you need to feel, you give someone else the power to decide how you feel. You hand them the remote control to your mind. Machiavelli understood this well. In The Prince, he spoke of cruelty as a tool, not a flaw. He spoke of image over intention, fear over love, results over morals, not because he hated emotion, but because he understood how emotions could be weaponized by others. He knew that leaders who ruled with detachment had a clarity that the emotional could never access. When you feel nothing, you can see everything. This doesn't mean you walk through life as a stone. It means you master the art of selective detachment. You decide when to feel, what to show, and who deserves to see it. That is what makes you powerful. Not the lack of emotion, but the refusal to be ruled by it. You see, control isn't about forcing others. It's about making yourself immovable. When they can't push your buttons, they lose interest. When they can't trigger you, they turn to others. And slowly, the balance shifts. You become the observer in a world of reactors. You become the still point in a room full of spinning minds. And in that stillness, that razor-sharp calm, you gain influence without saying a word. People confuse stoicism with weakness. They think silence is passive, but the one who speaks less often controls more, because he forces others to interpret. He creates mystery. and mystery breeds influence. The more they try to understand you, the more they think about you. The more they think about you, the more power you hold in their minds. Control begins internally. It starts by noticing your reactions, your impulses, your triggers, and then choosing not to follow them. Every time you resist the urge to explain yourself, to justify your silence, to defend your ego, you train the mind to remain sovereign. You remind yourself that your emotions are your own, not currency for others to manipulate. And this control spreads. It influences how you deal with conflict. It sharpens how you navigate relationships. You stop chasing closure, approval, understanding. You start crafting your world, not reacting to it. And that shift, though invisible, is everything. They say power corrupts, but the truth is, emotion corrupts first. The angry man cannot lead. The jealous man cannot build. The insecure man cannot command loyalty. Only the detached man, calm, precise, calculated, can sit at the center of chaos and remain untouched. That is the man who survives. That is the man who conquers. And once you understand this, once you experience the silence of a mind that no longer dances for others, you begin to see the world not as a battlefield of emotions, but as a system of patterns. Patterns you can influence, systems you can shape, people you can guide, without ever letting them see your hand. And once you've stepped into that stillness, that inner dominion where nothing penetrates unless allowed, you begin to realize something far more profound. The world bends, not for the strongest, not for the loudest, but for the one who knows how to remain silent and calculated while everyone else is screaming. Power doesn't come from domination. It comes from restraint. A lion that roars constantly becomes predictable, but a lion that waits, that watches, is feared before it even moves. The emotional man is at war with the world. He reacts to every insult, every opinion, every shift in tone. But the man who feels nothing learns that silence is not submission, it's surveillance. When others lose themselves in emotional chaos, he remains in command, gathering information, storing patterns, mastering timing. And when he finally speaks or acts, the impact is nuclear. This is the art of invisible warfare, to rule without appearing to manipulate not through force, but through absence, the absence of need, of reaction, of desperation. You're no longer seeking attention. You're no longer chasing validation. You're no longer explaining yourself to people who wouldn't understand anyway. And that makes you dangerous, because nothing is more threatening to the world than someone who cannot be controlled. Most people are addicted to emotional feedback. They speak to be heard, not to influence. They react because silence feels like death. But the Machiavellian mind understands this addiction and weaponizes it. You let others drown in their own noise while you build a fortress from their weaknesses. Their overexposure becomes your blueprint. And when they finally turn to you, because they always do, you control the narrative, because you never handed them yours. The irony is brutal. The less you react, the more powerful your presence becomes. You become an enigma, a question mark that gnaws at the minds of those who once thought they could read you. And curiosity, in the hands of a master, becomes a leash. People will always try to fill in the blanks, and in their attempts to understand you, they hand you their own internal maps, their fears, their needs, their insecurities. Use them wisely. In this kind of psychological terrain, you don't win by overpowering. You win by outlasting. Most men collapse under the weight of their own emotions. They sabotage themselves, revealing their plans too soon, defending their name too often, needing too much. But the man who feels nothing, the one who has taught himself to breathe in silence while the world burns, he survives every storm, because the storm is no longer inside him. Detachment sharpens perception. You see things others miss, micro-expressions, shifts in energy, hidden agendas in casual words. Why? Because your mind isn't busy reacting. It's calculating. That's what Machiavellian mastery really is. Not cruelty, but clarity. Not heartlessness, but strategic focus. And in a world where everyone's emotions are on display, clarity becomes the rarest and most valuable form of power. But to wield it, you must destroy the illusion that your emotions define you. They don't. They are visitors, not kings. Treat them as data, not destiny. Anger is information. Fear is a signal. Sadness is a map. But none are commands. They do not deserve the steering wheel. You can listen without obeying. You can observe without collapsing. And in that quiet resistance, you become sovereign. Imagine a negotiation where your face gives nothing away, where your pulse stays calm, where your opponent projects everything, frustration, anxiety, hope, while you remain motionless. That's not apathy. That is leverage. Every second they spend trying to decode you is a second they're not focused on their own power. You've stolen it without ever saying a word. Now understand this. Emotional control is not a denial of humanity. It is the refinement of it. You're not rejecting feeling. You're mastering it. You're not blind to suffering. You're no longer enslaved by it. The world needs less noise and more strategy, less expression, more execution. And those who dare to feel nothing on command, they don't lose their soul. They reclaim it from a world that tried to sell it back to them piece by piece. This mindset is not for everyone. Most will call it cold. Let them. Because the truth is, the more emotionally independent you become, the more emotionally dependent others grow on you. They begin to orbit your calm. They crave your silence. They seek your approval, even as you give them none. Why? Because your indifference becomes a mirror to their chaos, and deep down, they want that control for themselves. But here's the twist. Once they chase your stillness, you've already won. Not because you've tricked them, but because you've become what they cannot imitate. They can mimic anger, joy, tears, but they cannot manufacture your calm. That level of control is earned, and once earned, it can be weaponized, not cruelly, but efficiently. In relationships, in business, in conflict, the pattern holds. The less emotionally available you are, the more power you hold. Not because you withhold love, but because you don't hand over control. You can love without attachment. You can lead without needing. You can inspire without performing. And all of this stems from one truth. The ability to feel nothing when it matters most is the foundation of total control. And once you begin to move through life with that kind of emotional sovereignty, you notice how fragile the world truly is. People cling to their emotions as if they are sacred truths. They defend their feelings as if they're facts. But feelings aren't facts. They're leverage points. And in the hands of the strategist, those leverage points become tools, not to manipulate recklessly, but to bend the outcomes in your favor without ever appearing to push. The beauty of this state, this cultivated indifference, is that it doesn't just shield you from attack. It gives you options. When you're not emotionally invested, you can see 10 moves ahead. You're not just reacting to the board, you're designing it. You start to play the long game. While others rush to speak, to defend, to cry out for recognition, you observe. You listen. You let the silence build tension, and when you finally act, it lands with precision. True Machiavellian control is not about taking everything. It's about never needing anything from anyone. That is the root of your power, because need is weakness. The moment you need someone to understand you, to approve of you, to forgive you, you place yourself beneath them. You hand them the sword, and in doing so, you become disposable, replaceable. But when you remove that need, you become untouchable. Not because you've walled yourself off, but because you've elevated above the game entirely. That elevation isn't lonely. It's liberating. You stop negotiating your value. You stop performing for acceptance. You stop leaking power with every emotional outburst. And suddenly, the world starts adjusting to you, not the other way around. Others begin to ask what you're thinking, why you don't react, why you always seem one step ahead. But you never explain, because power explained is power diluted. Let them wonder. Let their assumptions become their prison. You already know, the less they understand you, the more they're controlled by the image of you they've constructed in their minds. And that image, it becomes a shadow that haunts them, that controls them, that binds them. What they don't see is the discipline it takes to hold the line. Because this isn't passive detachment, it's active mastery. Every urge you resist adds weight to your silence. Every temptation to react that you crush adds sharpness to your gaze. And over time, your very presence becomes a psychological force. You don't have to dominate the room. You are the room. People enter your orbit and instinctively adjust themselves. This is the power of restraint, not weakness, not coldness, but focused control. Emotional discipline becomes mental clarity, and mental clarity becomes behavioral precision. In time, you stop wasting energy explaining your boundaries. Your lack of reaction becomes the boundary. Your refusal to be pulled into emotional spirals becomes the statement. And those who once sought to control you now find themselves orbiting you, hoping for your response, desperate for your validation, which you withhold, not out of cruelty, but out of principle. Because here's the ultimate truth. When you no longer chase being understood, you become impossible to influence. You can't be guilted. You can't be shamed. You can't be baited into battles that offer no victory. That emotional neutrality becomes your armor. And while others swing wildly with feelings they barely understand, you cut with precision, saying less, meaning more, moving only when it serves your design. This kind of power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It grows in silence. It waits in stillness. And when it moves, it doesn't ask permission. There's a reason the most dangerous men in history didn't yell. They didn't flinch. They didn't beg. They watched. They calculated. They made you talk first. They let you believe you had the upper hand until you didn't. That's not a tactic. That's an identity. One formed through years of emotional pruning, mental sharpening, spiritual focus. You're not cold. You're clean. Clean of attachments that break men. Clean of impulses that cost kingdoms. Clean of the desperation that poisons the mind with weakness. The man who cannot be emotionally manipulated is the man who holds the reins of every interaction, even if he appears to be losing. Because appearances are irrelevant. Control is the only currency that matters. And don't be fooled. Most people are not evil. They're just emotional. And emotional people are inconsistent. They'll love you on Monday, envy you on Wednesday, betray you by Friday, and mourn you by Sunday. You cannot trust that cycle. You cannot build on it. What you build must be above it, founded not on emotional highs, but on strategic discipline. And when people sense that you operate from a code, not a craving, they begin to respect it, even if they fear it. Your silence becomes law. Your detachment becomes doctrine. Your presence becomes the standard against which others are measured. And while they chase attention, you move in shadows. While they cling to praise, you build systems. While they fight for validation, you control outcomes. That's the game. Not louder, not stronger, just more sovereign. You don't owe anyone your reactions. You don't owe them your emotional labor. Every time you withhold it, you remind yourself who holds the crown. And every time you master it, you remind the world that your kingdom begins where their emotions end. And so it becomes effortless, not because it's easy, but because it's ingrained. The need to explain, to be understood, to be emotionally involved, it fades, not with bitterness, but with precision. You start to measure everything by one standard. Does this strengthen my control, or does it leak my power? If it leaks, it leaves. If it strengthens, it stays. This is the final stage of emotional evolution. Not suppression, not rejection, but orchestration. You don't avoid emotions. You use them, like a blade honed not to wound, but to direct. When you do show emotion, a smile, a pause, a calculated silence, it lands like thunder because it is rare, deliberate, earned. You've trained your mind to become the architect, not the slave. Now, every move you make is by design. Every word you speak is a strike, not a noise. Others begin to sense it, even if they can't articulate it. They call it aura, presence, intensity. But what they're really seeing is your discipline, the absence of chaos. In a world addicted to emotional volatility, your stillness is terrifying. Not because it harms, but because it reveals. It shows people how much of their identity is reaction, how much of their reality is based on what others feel about them. You, on the other hand, have stepped out of that matrix. You're no longer responding to the world. You are constructing it. And here's the brutal paradox. The more emotionally sovereign you become, the more people want from you. Your attention becomes rare. Your validation becomes priceless. Your time becomes sacred. They chase you not because you are loud, but because you are absent. Your silence draws more obsession than their screaming ever could. You become the scarcity in their overstimulated lives, the ghost they want to catch, the shadow they long to impress. But you don't move for attention. You move for advantage. Because now you understand what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that it is better to be feared than loved. Not because fear is cruel, but because love without fear is taken for granted. People respect boundaries enforced by indifference. Not threats, not explanations, just distance, enforced without emotion. You've learned to control not only what you feel, but what others feel around you. You can guide a room without a word. You can dismantle a conflict without raising your voice. You can walk away from manipulation, not because it doesn't tempt you, but because you've already seen where it leads, and you no longer negotiate with chaos. This is why the man who feels nothing at the right time gains everything in the end. He does not win every battle. He does not crave every victory. He chooses his wars. He baits with silence. He punishes with absence. He rewards with presence. And every move reinforces the same unspoken law. Control is the only true currency in human interaction. Now understand, this path is not for the common mind. Most will break under the weight of their own silence. They'll crack, they'll overshare, they'll spiral into doubt, confusion, loneliness. But that's because they never trained for solitude. You did. You embraced the stillness. You sat with your demons until they submitted. You watched your emotions rise like storms and fall without reaction. And through that fire, you forged something few ever touch, self-rule. That's the final form of power, ruling yourself so completely that no one else ever gets the chance. Not because you shut them out, but because they don't have the keys, you hold them, and you decide when the doors open and for whom. And even then, they never see the full map, only the corners you let them wander through. Your emotions are now instruments. Your thought, weapons. Your silence, policy. Your presence, leverage. And you carry them all with a kind of invisible elegance that unnerves the weak and attracts the strong. You've become not just a man, but a force. Not just a thinker, but a tactician. Not just a presence, but a symbol. They'll say you've changed. Let them. They'll say you've become distant, cold, unreachable. Good. Distance is clarity. Coldness is focus. Unreachability is power. You didn't come here to be liked. You came here to rule, not with iron, but with silence. Not with violence, but with presence. Not with feelings, but with flawless restraint. Because the man who feels nothing when others are breaking, who stands still when others collapse, who walks away when others beg, he is not heartless. He is crowned, not by gold or title, but by control. And in the game of power, there is no higher throne. So when the world screams, and the storms rise, and the people turn to each other in fear, you won't flinch. You'll stand. You'll see everything. You'll feel nothing. And in that void, that perfect, ruthless calm, you'll hold the entire world in your hands. And if this voice echoes something you've always known, but never heard spoken, if this truth strikes deeper than noise ever could, then make your move. Not for me, but for the mission. Like the video, share it with those who walk the edge like you do, and subscribe to stay inside the circle, where silence is sacred and power speaks in whispers. This isn't just content. It's a code, and only those who see through the noise belong here.